My name is Matt Harlock.
And I'm Paul Thomas, and we're the producer-directors of American The Hicks Story, which is a project about an American comedian that some people know very well and other people don't really know who he is.
Well, you might be able to tell from our accents that we're from the UK, and Bill is someone who's always had a very strong cultural significance over there. He played the UK for 2 or 3 years in the late 80s and early 90s, and at the time caused kind of a cultural sensation. The reason was that he was addressing large, important, big topics, but in a very, very different way, a very forceful way that people hadn't really seen before. And it was that kind of material that gave him, sort of controversial issues here in the States. In the UK, he was broadcast unedited for an hour and a half and really connected with a huge, large percentage of the population. And that's kind of what led us to be interested in the project. As somebody who had always had a very strong cultural significance in the UK, but for some reason never really quite crossed over to the mainstream public consciousness in the States.
Mm-hmm. Well, the project began a couple of years before we kind of put the film idea together, when Matt did a 10th anniversary tribute night in the UK. Every year Bill Hicks fans get together and kind of celebrate Bill's life, and Matt put on a 10th anniversary tribute, and through that got to know the family very well.
I think there was a bit of both. The family hadn't really talked about Bill in the 15 years since his passing. They'd spoken to one sort of small set of documentary team a while back, and so they had been approached by a number of people and were understandably cautious. The reason was that there was lots of material of Bill's which hadn't really been seen in public before, and they had been asked by people, well, why can we just get hold of that and put it out on DVD. What they were really looking for, I think, was a team who were interested in telling Bill's story in a way that helped more people engage with his work. And so we were lucky enough to be the guys who spent 2 years working with them to get to the point where filming started in October of 2006. They were cautious, but at the same time I think that they also understood that Bill's story is important, and that they needed to get this down on the historical record. And so Bill's closest friends and his family all spoke to us over a period of about 2 months in late October of 2006, and we felt immensely honoured, but also that there was a pressure there because his story was now in our hands.
Mm-hmm. What was really interesting was that some time had passed since Bill's death, and I think when Bill died, no one knew what would happen because he hadn't quite broken through to the American mainstream, and could have easily faded away there. But what did happen, and I think the internet's helped this, is that more and more people have continued to find Bill. So when we started, the family were now aware of our son, our brother, isn't someone who's going to be forgotten. Mm-hmm. His material still matters, is still very relevant. That's something that's very hard to answer. What would have happened had Bill lived? He was on the cusp of breaking through in the kind of mainstream American media. And Bill was very smart. I mean, he was playing at 2 games. One was to get his ideas and his comedy out there, but he also was very good on TV, and he could tone down the act when he had to. He was never comfortable doing that, and I think he would have gone on to break through into the mainstream media and then to have played that game very well.
I mean, the other thing to remember is that the political and comedic landscape has changed quite considerably in the last sort of 15 years. So now you have Jon Stewart and The Daily Show, Stephen Colbert, and even people like Michael Moore, who prove that there are audiences out there for political, satirical thinking. And I think that, in some ways Bill was ahead of his time, and that he was addressing subjects that people weren't doing on television then, but are doing every day now, and seemingly having great success at it. So I think that if he'd stayed around, then he would have had much more of a chance to engage with a wider audience. And I think that this film is evidence of that, in that you get to see his work, what he was doing as a performer, politically, as well as in other terms for his stagecraft, in terms of pushing the medium of what comedy could be. And I think that really clearly comes out in a way that makes you think, well, if he'd only lived, then maybe we would have been seeing him on the same level as someone like Jon Stewart. Mm-hmm. Well, what we first encountered when we interviewed Bill's family and friends was this massive archive of photographic material. Bill was one of those people who seemingly kind of had an innate understanding that he was living his life in a meaningful way and kept almost everything, like in terms of photo shoots, negatives, in terms of flyers, reviews. And we also found a number of photographers who'd worked with Bill, so there was just this massive archive of material which kind of started telling its own story. But the other really important point is that in terms of how to go about engaging an audience with a documentary, documentaries have become much more narrative over the last few years, and films like Touching the Void have tried to use more sort of dramatic narrative techniques as opposed to just being talking heads and clips from archive. And I think what we felt was that after having these interviewees give such amazing tellings of these scenes and aspects of Bill's life, that we needed to try and find a visual way which matched that. And then seeing all this archive material kind of gave us a clue, well, maybe there's a way of trying to combine those two things into a form which immerses the viewer in the experience of Bill's family and his friends. Wonderful scenes like when they're sneaking out to go to the comedy club for the first time, and you're actually with these 15-year-old kids on this exciting kind of commando raid, running down to the comedy store illegally because their parents are strict and wouldn't let them go. And being able to put Bill and his friends into the same scenes with the photograph and this animation technique that's been developed really gives a sense of time and place, which audiences so far at festivals and in the UK have been really responding to.
Well, yeah, when Bill and Dwight first started writing material, there wasn't even that comedy club in town. I mean, they were lucky. It was a time in America when comedy clubs did start springing up in every town. But they had the challenge. They were teenagers, very strict parents, and they weren't allowed to go down to this adult nightclub. So that was the first kind of test, and that shows really how much they wanted this, is that they were prepared to, disobey their parents and sneak out. Dwight left a very touching note on his record player. They both had these record players that could play stacks of records. So they would leave a stack of records there, sneak out, hoping that the music would play all night in their bedroom, and the parents would just think they were up there and not discover it. But Dwight left a note on the stack of records saying, "I've gone down to the comedy club because I have to." And that was just the first of many battles that Bill faced through his career. I think you're right. I think it's different now in that anyone who thinks they're funny can give it a go and put things up on YouTube. But it's still, what's interesting about comedy is the audience does decide. I think it's more accessible now, especially for teenagers to try stuff out. But yeah, that was what they faced in those young years. Was you have this dream about being a comedian, but how do you follow it, and what are you prepared to do to make it?
And I think there's also something to be quantified about YouTube phenomenons becoming popular, and obviously we've seen people like Justin Bieber who you may or may not like, but there are also people like Bo Burnham who has been making songs in his bedroom from the age of 14, racked up 50 million views, and is now going on tour and reaching audiences, and you can tell he's absolutely an incredibly gifted performer, not just musically but also as a stand-up, and the barrier to entry is a lot lower. As you say, you can just sit in your bedroom and upload a clip, but the barrier to success is still exactly as high as it always was, which is that you have to be good. And there are for every Bo Burnham, there's another 100 Bo Burnhams who never made it because they just didn't have what he had. So I think that the ability to broadcast yourself, I believe that is in fact YouTube's actual tagline, and we'll be hopefully collecting our checks at the end of this interview. But the ability to broadcast yourself doesn't mean that you become any good. It just means that other people get to see you. So I think that the barrier to entry is lower, but the barrier to success is still the same as it ever was. And Bill was somebody who proved that even without the internet, that you can still go viral. I mean, in the UK and in Australia and Canada and in the US, in Austin, people have been buying bootleg tapes of his for years. And this is analog. I'm talking about VHSs and CDs and C90s. So I think that the main thing about somebody who's good is that people who discover them want to tell other people, and that viral effect can happen with or without the internet. We know it happened before, and with Bill it's something that's particularly prevalent, as we've seen with the film and with audiences. Once people discover this guy, they want to tell their friends, and it's because he really does have a massive impact on people, on their lives and on the way that they think.
Really interesting point in the film where Bill becomes ill, because and with a devastating illness as well. You can't just carry on your life. You have to take chemotherapy. It makes you very, very ill. But Bill took the very strong decision not just to carry on, but to start writing and producing more material. He redoubled his efforts. and produced enough material for 2 further albums and used that as a focus. He also thought he was going to pull through. Everybody did. Pancreatic cancer is one of those forms that still has such a low survival rate. But it's said that he was at peace by the time he had kind of 8 months of life since his diagnosis. The film. I mean, what's very unique about Bill's comedy is that it's still very relevant today. It'll still be relevant in another 20 years. So even though this story is now 17 years old, it doesn't feel like a historical story about something that happened way back then. All of the ideas are very current, and so it's not just about creating a sense of closure. It's about, in fact, Bill hands this body of material on, and we can all still watch it. You can still enjoy full-length performances of him on stage. You can still see these very rare clips from comedy clubs, and so that's what the film does. It's not, the story was never kind of over, and it never will be over.